Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. We are a year-round talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, and theater. And today we're so lucky to be joined by the fantastic Lily Collins, who is all across Netflix right now with Emily in Paris and Mank. And I actually wanted to dive in by talking about Mank first, because I thought it was so interesting that you started out doing a self-tape for David Fincher and sending that into him. And, you know, self-tapes are so challenging in their own unique way because you don't get the opportunity to walk in the room and have that immediacy of feedback and to try different things based on any sort of response that they have. So how did you approach putting together the self-tapes specifically for a project like this, which has, you know, such a specific tone and feel to it?
It definitely has a specific tone and feel. I was about to head into Paris to shoot Emily in Paris, so I was very much in that mindset to go from bright, bold, bubbly to reserved, more quiet, British. It was a definitely a transition, to say the least. And I just basically saw the self tape as kind of a shot in the dark. Dream to work with David Fincher, but I didn't really know how much that would come to fruition. So
Mhm.
I just thought, you know what, I'm going to do my self tape with my really good friend Kevin Zegers, who is like family. I did a movie with him, The Mortal Instruments, and we kind of do a lot of our self tapes together over the years. And he's really good at giving me direction as well. And so we went into it going, this is just for fun. It's an exercise. It would be amazing if David saw it and just get to play around with it. So I have done British accent multiple times in work, and I also just had one when I was growing up. So this was just kind of fine tuning a specific nuanced place and time. Obviously the 1930s is going to be a different tone in your voice, and so I just played around with it, and we did it a couple times. And at the end of the day, I sent it off knowing that this is what I can give you, and I left, I think, the next day or 2 days later to go to Paris. So I really just sent it off thinking,
Mhm.
okay, I've done all I can do. And I'm a real people person. I
Mhm.
love going into a room. I love having feedback. I enjoy playing around. I like taking notes and running with them and showing someone that I can really take direction. And that's just something that I really enjoy. So to have a different experience where you're self-taping,
Mhm.
that's not always the easiest, because you do send something off and hope that someone responds in a way that gives you the chance to either self-tape again if need be,
Mhm.
or can kind of see the imagination of what your tape could be given
Mhm.
direction. But there's pros and cons to both. You have the luxury of time doing a self-tape
Mhm.
sometimes, where you can try 10 different things and only send the best.
Mhm.
So there's pros and cons to both, but I didn't expect to then get to the next stage, which was a Zoom, which was at a time when I didn't know what Zoom was. I was like, is Zoom, it's another version of Skype or FaceTime, right? And now it's like Zoom is kind of like what Kleenex or, Band-Aid. It's become the official kind of word of videoing.
And in terms of your character in playing Rita, there's very little information and not very many images of her. And you've mentioned how because of that, in the way that you thought about her as a character was very much in relation to her relationship with Mank. So how did that alter your process and the way that you would really usually work with the scripts and deconstruct and figure out a character to be looking at them more through the lens of another character in a lot of the scenes that you're in with them?
It was really interesting because, yeah, usually you're playing someone who was alive that you can read a lot about, or you're pretending and you're creating a character that wasn't alive, but you can draw from so many different experiences of your own or other characters you played, or just doing research of who you think the person is. This was kind of a mixture of the two. Rita was a real life person who served an incredible purpose in Mankiewicz's life and the storytelling of Citizen Kane. But unfortunately, there's very little to be found on her. So the few photos that we were able to see, as well as the little blurbs that you can read, were the only tangible, evidence of her existence that I could find. And then really she services such a great role in the story of kind of the heart, the emotion of the story in a lot of ways. She has such a deep set moral compass that she represents a lot of the story's morality. Um, and it's in the moments with Mankiewicz and Rita that you get to really see the softer side and the insecurities and the struggles of Mankiewicz. So that purity, that light, that encouragement that Rita represents is helped me in the creation of her tone of voice per se,
Mhm.
because it needed to sound soothing but stern. And I was trying to think of, okay, well, what do I like to listen to soothe me, whether it's in a meditation or it's in a podcast or a storytelling situation. You want something that sounds kind of maternal and nurturing, but to the point. So it's like, okay, well, that kind of helps. And then at the same time, she's also represents this excitement and light within the industry that he kind of sometimes can be jaded to not see anymore, right? So that she's hired help, so she has to be professional, but she's also a young woman who is deeply fascinated in the people that she's hearing about because they are the celebrities of the time. And so there's this fine balance between being um, I'm a professional and I can't show him how much of interest I have in this, but also, oh my God, you knew them? Tell me everything. And so she kind of represented the audience in a lot of those ways. And when she does light a fire under Mankiewicz, she's acting as the audience in a lot of ways of saying, just come on, like you can do this, and you did make a promise. And so it's in that I felt like I represented more than just Rita.
Mhm. And in terms of working with David Fincher, obviously he has such a specific vision and is incredibly articulate in communicating that to cast that he's working with and to the crew in the way that he's filming, and loves to lean into a lot of takes, which you've mentioned is a way that you also really love to work as well because of the experimentation and never going home feeling like you left an opportunity on the table to try something. So kind of given that relationship and the way that the two of you are working, and the fact that it really does feed itself to the way that you enjoy working yourself as well, what do you feel like some of the experimentation that you got the opportunity to try with this character was, whether it ended up in the final film or not?
When you work with David Fincher, you know that it's going to come with the gift of time because he doesn't settle for anything less than what he knows you are capable of or what he wants for the picture in the end. And that comes with needing the time to get there. And sometimes it's not just about the actors, it's about the timing of lighting cues and all these different extras walking in the background, and there's so much at play in every frame of a Fincher film. And so you know that you're going to have the opportunity to try something new on the next take because you know most likely there'll be a next take. And what I love is that David knows exactly what he wants and he is a genius in what he does, and you have this innate sense of trust with him that when you sign up for something with David, you know that it's going to be something special. And so having that trust right away when you walk on set in an environment where as an actor you're very vulnerable every single day because you are putting yourself front and center and emotionally available in any character that you play. So to know that you're being led by someone who is the best captain of the ship for this story and will give you the direction that he wants to go in, but he also gives you the ability to play. It's like someone giving you the parameters in which you can explore. Like these are where we're headed. This is where we're headed, and then you can try things and run wild. And every time that you say, or that I would say, I was thinking of trying it this way, he'd say, okay, show me. Like his key words were just show me. And to be given the trust, knowing that he trusts us and wants to collaborate with us to create these characters, but isn't in a situation where he's like, I don't know where I want to go. I mean, you're safe, you feel protected, you feel nurtured, you feel encouraged. And that's the playground that you ideally want, and to learn from yourself what you didn't even know you were capable of, because sometimes you think, oh, I know exactly what I want to do in this situation, and then the more opportunities you have to try it in different takes, all of a sudden you're all the way over here and you thought that you were starting here, and now the scene's taken on a whole new breath, and you would never have gotten there if you didn't have the gift of time and somebody that was willing to explore with you. And it's so interesting because in some of the scenes with Rita specifically, for me, how much do I play into the excitement of the world of Mankiewicz, and how curious do I show him that I am versus just staying like professional, as well as in the scene where um, Mankiewicz has just made fun of me when I received the letter about my husband. He has no idea what I learned, but I'm so upset I have to leave. And we don't know exactly how many hours later it is that she comes back, but she comes back and kind of just says this thing about, you were right, but also I expected more of you. And she just, she's been outside planning this, but we don't know exactly how long. We don't know how angry she still is. We don't know how emotional she's going to be. And so David allowed me to try it so many different ways. And ultimately we had lots of different options to play with. So it's really giving options to know in the edit that it can go so many different ways. And that taught me a lot, because when you give options and you can explore all these different nuances of a scene paired with what the person opposite you does, the edit can be a mixture of all those things put together, and it looks as though you made all those choices in one, and you're like, wow, that makes it look like I did a much better job than maybe I did on that take. It's all in the edit sometimes.
And in terms of the camera work, aesthetically, beyond the fact that it's filmed in black and white, that also informs a lot of the camera work that we see. And it's a lot of kind of very slow, steady shots. The angles that he chooses are very different to what we would see in modern cinema, really thinking to the time period. How much of an impact did that have on you and Gary and the rest of the cast in those scenes in terms of the choreography and the blocking, and in particular in the fact that the coverage that you're filming even is very different?
Very different. It definitely helps remind you of the period, and also the fact that it would be in black and white, because I hair, makeup, and wardrobe costumes are always a huge part of creating a character for me. And seeing things in color versus seeing things in black and white is drastically different. And when you shoot, you're looking at the world as it is and it's in color, but being reminded that this film is going to be as if you took it off a shelf from the 1930s. Anything that you can see tangibly that helps remind you of that, even though it's in here, sometimes when you're looking at something knowing it's going to be totally different, it's hard to be reminded. So in all of the conversations we had about tones of gray and black and white, and the fading in and out of lighting. Like, there's key moments and buttons of scenes. I think Gary and I are in quite a few of them where the lighting cue at the very end of a scene meant that Gary and I had to stare at each other, stay in that last moment until the lights faded out and went to black. And those moments were ones where I thought, oh, right, this is really going to look like a period film. It's not a post-production lighting cue. This is a physical, tangible cue that is a reminder of how genuine to the period this film is going to feel, and how it's almost as if you're sitting slouched and you're reminded to constantly do this, and any of those moments I welcome, because it's easy to get so lost in the moment of a scene or in yourself as a character, that when something is so different than you've ever done before, you sometimes need those reminders. And the tone, everyone did such an amazing job of like you mentioned with dialect and tone, the tone of everyone's voice. There was a clipped feeling and like a succinct way that they all spoke that felt very period. So when you're listening to that 24/7, that's also a cue. And like with the camera angles of these sweeping shots, or kind of wide lenses from an angle, or even camera lenses up into your face. I've not done angles like that before, and at first it can seem a little bit strange, but you think back to the films, like I grew up on watching old films, so you think about those really amazing cinematic moments where it felt so grand, and a lot of that had to do with the incredible camera work. And so when you're talking to Eric Messerschmidt, our DP, about all of the camera angles he's going to use, he pulls out a book and he's drafted and drawn every setup, which is fascinating, because then he can explain to you where things are going to be and what the shot is. And I've always been someone that's super inquisitive, so I love asking all those questions. And with the amount of coverage you're going to get, so there were so many ways in which this was different, and a lot of those reminders throughout the day that helped you remember, oh, this is special, this is different.
I love that you were just mentioning how much characters costumes really inform a lot of aspects and details to them. Because with Emily in Paris, I know that you got the opportunity to work, not just with Patricia Field, but incredibly collaboratively with her, where she would have conversations with you about what do you think Emily would wear, and so I was interested in the types of conversations that the two of you had together about what you really wanted to convey about Emily as a person through the clothes that the two of you kind of looked at, and how you built that aesthetic look for her.
Well, I have admired Patricia Field's work
Mm-hmm.
for years. She's fearless, and her costumes are very much characters in themselves. And for Emily, Emily is the opposite of Rita in a lot of ways. She's bright, bold, bubbly, and a little bit obvious. And she's not afraid to take risks in fashion. And that's very much indicative of who she is as a person. She's bright, boldly, a little bit obvious, and a risk taker. And so with the clothing, what Patricia does so geniusly is mix patterns, colors, prints, textures, um, shapes, designers, all of these things that Emily also does. And I leaned very much into what Patricia is so incredible at, but at the same time wanted to include bits of myself. And I didn't know how collaborative she'd be because she's so amazing at her job. And right away, the first time I met her, I flew to New York for less than 24 hours, and I got to her studio, and just right away she said, okay, so tell me, what do you think Emily would wear? Who is she? Do you want to wear heels? Do you want to wear flats? Do you want to wear dresses more of the time? She just started asking me these questions, and I thought she'd say to me, this is A to Z, what you're going to be wearing. This is the transition. And we both agreed that it was so amazing that there wasn't this stereotypical wardrobe scene where she goes into a store and Emily in Chicago comes out Emily in Paris. And all of a sudden she's been, she's Parisian and she's only looking a certain way to fit in. She never has that. She stays Emily throughout the entire show. Of course, there are moments that you see, oh wow, she now is now wearing a beret, or she's adapting different versions of where she is. I do the same thing. I think when we travel, or when we have traveled, we pick up things that we like from different cultures and places around the world. So I liked starting to implement those things and mixing in vintage, as well as there are certain moments in the show where I'm even wearing things of Patricia's from her wardrobe, because one day it was raining and I needed a rain jacket. So she went and grabbed her rain jacket. And then when I'm arriving from Chicago, I needed a backpack. All the ones we saw were a little too small and didn't look realistic. And I'm like, I just want more like a used schleppy backpack. And she looked at hers and she's like, well, I have this one. Dumps out her stuff, puts it in a plastic bag, and she's like, use this. And it just surprised me with how collaborative and just in the moment she was. And every day I just got to pick out my jewelry. What would you wear? So it was just really fun because I got to feel like even more of the creation of Emily was a part of the character building for me.
Yeah. And it's also really striking to think about Emily's relationships on screen, because one of the facets of the show is that every single person that she's interacting with, she's meeting for the very first time. And so I was interested in how that shifted the way that you created and thought about her backstory as a character, given that you couldn't look at any of these relationships as a way to kind of feed into her in the same way of like, okay, this is how long they've known each other for, this is what their relationship is, to give you those additional details. So how did that really shift the way that you worked with backstory on her as a character?
That's a fascinating question. I've never been asked that, and it's very interesting because it gets into the really like emotional core part of who Emily is. And when you get to be an outsider in a new world and kind of a fish out of water, you get to create a new story for yourself. And because you're unknown, you create your narrative. What's hard in 10 episodes of a first season of a show is to get to dive into all the things that you want to while introducing new characters. So you hope that in her reactions and interactions with new people, you get a sense of who she is. Now, we see a little bit of Emily breaking up with her boyfriend at the very beginning, and you see in that breakup scene what she values and what she wants and what she hopes for, and the fact that she's actually willing to put herself first, not in a selfish way, but in a self-care sort of way. And you right away go, oh, she's confident. She's not afraid to be vulnerable, but she knows what she wants, and she wants to be open to exploration and excitement and something new. So there's obviously something about her old her old life that she's tired of and needs to be inspired, inspired through. So you already know that that's where she's coming from. And just the fact that she's so open to meet new people and that she does attract someone like a Mindy, says a lot about her character. And then through her interactions with the guys that she either dates for, goes on one date, with, or a couple dates, or that has this are they or aren't they going to relationship with Gabrielle, you start to see the different qualities she's looking for in somebody and what it is that it's teaching her about herself. So sometimes I think, in life, it's not just the people that you meet, it's the way in which you interact with them that really defines who you are and the situations that you're put into. And it's also like in her work life, the challenges she faces, and she constantly is pivoting. She is very resourceful. So you know that she's had to be a go-getter and someone that's been able to outsource before. She's been trained in her job. You get these little tidbits, but you don't get specifics. So getting to go to a season 2, I think now being able to have these relationships already built with these new people, I'm sure I'm hoping we get to dive into more of all of their backstories, because you can imagine when we're not filming, or when you're not seeing Emily and Mindy on screen, of course they've talked about, so tell me more about you. But we just haven't been able to see that because we only had 10 episodes, and now we get to do more, which is so exciting. So I think that the backstory is more of what I'm excited to tell, as opposed to just coming up with on my own. Because I think that we want to be invested in the characters to know where they came from and where they're going to go.
Yeah. And exactly to the point in the way that you're describing her, and how she really does have this core sense of who she is. And the journey of the show isn't about her finding herself, which is so rare for TV shows about women at this particular stage in life. She knows exactly who she is. So how did you think about her in terms of fundamentally knowing who she is, but thinking about the smaller, more nuanced ways in which she would gradually start to pivot or evolve based on being in such an entirely new situation with all these different relationships?
Well, I didn't want her. She's already physically lost because she's in a new environment that speaks a different language, somewhere she's never been before.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want it to feel as though she was emotionally and physically lost, because then there's no like core stability in who she is. And I didn't want her to come across as confused and just like flimsy,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted there to be, if you're physically lost, at least she can come home to herself. And, I've traveled so much in the work that I do, and I'm always finding myself in foreign places, but I have to feel at peace and at home with my decisions and who I am. And at least when I'm meeting new people, who is it that I'm going to show them? Who am I? And the fact that all these experiences are just creating more opportunities for Emily to show who she is was really important to me. And I think that she she has such a strong sense of self and of her character. And in the moments where her boss mimics and mimics her voice, or the way that she reacts to something, or makes fun of her clothing, or her coworkers who end up embracing her, they're catty towards her at the beginning. And instead of saying, I should quiet myself and dim my light, she says, yeah, I am a little bit obvious, but actually here's why it's good. And she shows this other perspective, hopefully not in an annoying, can-do, overly positive attitude, because on paper, a lot of her qualities could easily get a bad rap, which I think is sad that sometimes positivity can be seen as annoying, because God knows there's enough negativity, going on in the world, and anxiety, that I think if we shifted our perspective just a little bit, it eases some of the responsibility and the kind of weight that we feel of going through each day, and being able to see a different side. And that's what Emily provides. She provides a light. And if Emily wasn't sure in who she was, that's not to say she's not going to grow and make mistakes and change her perspective on things. I know who I am, but I'm still learning like different design aesthetics that I like, and changing my ideas on things based on education and conversation. So she's very open to the world, and isn't ashamed to admit when she should know more and how can she learn more. But I think if she wasn't sure on who she was, she wouldn't be the light that she needed to be. And that's important to see a character like that provides joy and light and laughter, and to kind of remind us what fun can look like and feel like. Of course, we didn't know it would come out during a pandemic, but I'm so grateful that because of the joy that Emily brought me playing her, is able to now be seen at a time when we are craving that more than ever. Also, travel and the magic of getting lost in a foreign city and beautiful architecture, and that is something we're also craving. But I think to just see pure, genuine love and light and just joy in a character, that's something that's inspirational in a way.
Mhm. And as well as starring in every single scene within the show, this was also your first time producing. And, you've talked about how it was such a great opportunity to be in a room and be a part of a lot of creative conversations, and that it actually was a space where people listened to your input and to your voice. And so I wanted to ask you about what was some of the input that you felt was important to give, and some of the things that you really pushed for and advocated for in terms of who you saw Emily being on screen.
Well, I think the pilot episode was the first two episodes combined, so that was written before I auditioned. Then, once I got the part, the rest of the series was written very much in the moment. Like the last table read for the last episode was all of our first experience reading that script. So it was really happening in real time in Paris, which was wonderful because you got to feel the energy of the city in the scripts and you weren't trying to make a script work in the city. So all of our voices became very much the characters. There were lines that Mindy's character, or that Ashley and I were saying in scenes where it felt as though our conversations were just being taped of us. And so they really caught on to the mannerisms that we started to portray as the characters, our points of view. And I was involved in the logical conversations of scheduling, of different set design, different locations that I thought made sense. Then with Patricia, different outfits that spoke metaphorically and emotionally to the scenes, and changing out some of the changes that were planned for certain days, actually saying, you know what, I think this makes more sense logically, and playing into the props that I had. So there were a lot of conversations about what is it that she brought from home? What are her belongings? What would she bring to work? How is she going to interact with the people at work based on episode 3? I think actually maybe we want to open that up to them having a good relationship in episode 10. So how can we pivot that? So it was knowing the trajectory that I would really love to see in that character, and speaking to all the writers and talking to Darren, who was so collaborative and open to all different types of conversations of, well, what do you want Emily to say? There were lines that I said, you know what, maybe she would in this moment be open to making fun of herself, because she's also, it's a comedy, like she's very comedic, but she's not trying to be jokey. She's just expressive. And a lot of Emily's expressions and saying a lot without saying anything on her face, that was me finding the character. It wasn't written that Emily was super expressive. I was just trying to find ways in which to show that she was lost but also still there, and so much of what was going on with Emily was me saying, okay, these are the ways in which I'm similar with Emily, these are the ways in which I'm different. Can we implement more of these differences in these scenes? And it was really great to have
at the time, Darren, everyone be so open to allowing me to do that, which was so special.
Well, congratulations on everything with Emily in Paris and Mank, and thank you so much for taking time to talk about both of these great projects with us today.
Well, thank you guys for having me.